Welcome back to the show, and joining me now from Vienna is Victor Gao. He is director of the China National Association of International Studies. Also with me here in the studio is Sourabh Gupta. He is a senior fellow at the Institute of China-America Studies. Welcome to both of you to the show. Victor, let me start with you. President Xi Jinping has called these reforms a milestone in the modernization of the Chinese military. He said that the formation of the rocket force and the strategic support force are crucial measures to rebuilding a modern force. Question is, how important will these reforms be to China's security?
I would say the military reform that China is going through as we speak is the largest scale and the most profound military reform since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. And the implications will go very, very far. And the whole military is being shaked up as we speak. And the Chinese military forces will be completely remolded as a result of this military reform. And it will impact on all the branches of the military, as well as the lineup of the military command system. So this will be unprecedented and extremely important. The Chinese military will emerge out of this military reform completely remolded and reproduced.
So what is your assessment of these reforms? How will they be viewed by the international community?
The international community will keep a close watch on these reforms, but these are mostly reforms of an organizational and institutional nature which are internal to the Chinese military. So this will be primarily something that the experts in the West will be watching in terms of how China goes about its modernization and whether it is successful in making these reforms. It is not going to be seen as necessarily a threat as such. That would be determined more by the force structure and the nature of deployments, etc. But there will be a great watch on this simply because this really will make the Chinese military a very robust fighting force in the Asia Pacific and well beyond.
Victor, looking at these reforms which are being implemented right now, the modernization of the military, were they inevitable in any case for China?
Well, it's not only the modernization of the military in China. I would say prior to this reform, the Chinese military lineup was mostly for national defense within the country, and the whole of the country was divided into 7 military commands. And these military commands very much followed the administrative lineup, the provinces, the regions, etc. And their top mission was to hold the ground in case a war breaks out and defend to the last minute. And then between the military commands, coordination will be minimum. And further, I would say, at the very top level, the Central Military Commission was more symbolic rather than substantive, because the real power in the military lineup was very, very much vested in the 4 general departments: the General Political Department, the General Staff, the General Logistics Department, and the General Equipment Department. Each of these 4 general departments would be considered like a huge mountain in itself, and most of the decisions will be made in each of these departments. The Central Military Command stayed on top of that, but it really remained more symbolic than substance. After the reform, 3 of the general departments will be abolished and folded into the Central Military Commission, and the Central Military Commission would become more substantive rather than symbolic. And also you mentioned the renaming of the missile force, for example. Originally it was called the 2nd Artillery Force, and also the strategic support troop, which would be very much modernized using all kinds of new ways of thinking, including cyberspace, for example, as well as financial, energy security, etc. All these things will be folded into this newly created new army. And I would say, and on top of that, the creation of the 5 theaters, as we call it, would really be facilitating the Chinese military force to project their strengths, not only within the Chinese border, but far beyond the Chinese border in the coming years and decades. In that sense, the Chinese military will not only be streamlined and modernized, but also it will be enabled to fight a war not only within China, but beyond its border in the coming few years. Of course, the fundamental rationale for the Chinese military force remains unchanged. That is national defense. But now that Chinese interests go everywhere in all corners of the world, the Chinese military need to go through this remolding very quickly so that in case of any conflict or any major threat to Chinese national interest, the Chinese military force can behave as it is needed in a new and remolded manner.
Right, and Sourabh, looking at that, China's armed forces have not been engaged in any kind of armed conflict for decades. Will these reform plans that are underway right now make it easier for the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, to deter war?
To deter war? Oh, absolutely. It'll definitely will help the Chinese military and the People's Liberation Army to deter war, because we are seeing the creation of a full spectrum capability, full spectrum dominance capability across the Chinese military, which will become a very potent force. That itself will be a deterrent to any actor, and we're not talking mid-sized actors, we're talking somebody as powerful as the United States. We are also seeing in the course of this reform, this focus on informational jointness across various domains, which is very important because that will go to the heart of a Chinese military which can deter or can take action very rapidly in terms of at a time of a contingency. This is true modernization of a military from a defensive force to an offensive fighting force if need be in any geographic theater. But also at the end of the day, this is not about China going far out to find enemies to fight.
Right.
It's more about taking care of its interests and defending its interests as they expand, as China's footprint expands in the world.
Right, talking about China's expanding footprint, Victor, China and the East African state of Djibouti have agreed to establish what they call a logistical support facility in Djibouti. Now, what are the unique challenges that China faces right now? I mean, it's a growing economic power. It has strategic international commitments as well. Can we expect more of a focus on the sea right now, for instance?
Well, ever since December 2008, China has been rotating a flotilla, each flotilla serving for 3 months in the water areas of Somalia, mostly to protect the merchant shipping lane over there. China, after all, is the largest trading nation in the world and is the largest manufacturing nation in the world, and Chinese economic and political interests really penetrate to all corners of the world. And each time when the flotilla, normally including 2 warships and a support ship, would be navigating in that particular international water of Somalia, there was no particular support system to support these 3 ships. And therefore, I would say, the Chinese commitment to build presence in Djibouti will provide necessary support for the flotilla to provide protection not only to Chinese merchant ships, but also to merchant ships for all other countries. And I would say the Djibouti military presence for China will just be the first of quite a number of them which are being contemplated. Eventually, I would say, China will have military presence not only in Djibouti, but in several other well-chosen regions in the world to provide strategic support for the Chinese military presence in the Indian Ocean and possibly also in the Atlantic Ocean, and also here where we are very closely following in the Pacific Ocean. So I would say the essence of Chinese national security is expanding, and the ingredients of the national security are being reshuffled as we speak going forward.
Victor, just one other point I want to ask you about that. And can we expect a reaction from other forces in the region? I mean, will other countries start ramping up as well?
Well, China is one of the five permanent member states of the United Nations Security Council, and China, up to this Djibouti endeavor, is the only country which does not have overseas military presence. In China, we used to take great pride in saying that we do not have any single Chinese soldier stationed abroad unless they are joining the United Nations peacekeeping forces. But going forward, I would say this will change, mainly because China needs a military presence in other parts of the world to provide speedy and effective military protection for the Chinese national interests. I hope other countries will believe that the Chinese military presence eventually spreading out to other parts of the world will still be very much used for protecting the Chinese national interests rather than to look for conflicts or confrontation with other countries. And in a sense, I would say the more Chinese presence in the world to be fully protected, the better it will facilitate global peace and stability. So in this sense, I would say there will be a symbolism, but also substantive change in the Chinese military deployment strategies going forward. And other countries need to readjust to this very fast and large-scale change in the Chinese military presence.
What do you feel, Sourabh? Will other countries, other forces in the region respond as well?
Yes, I will. They will respond in the context of China going out, not so much in the context of institutional and organizational reform within the military, but in terms of its actual deployments far from its shores. In this area, what I would suggest, I mean, as Victor says, this is a natural corollary of China being who it is in terms as a global trading power and its wider interests. And China needs to have these deployments overseas and presence like at Djibouti. What I would suggest, though, is that China's military diplomacy also needs to be enhanced and improved, and actually should be in a position prior to these deployments communicate intent across the sea lines of communication to the important countries that reside along these sea lines of communication as to the reasons it is doing these particular deployments. I think Chinese military diplomacy has not been as good as its foreign policy diplomacy, and it has not communicated as well as what its intentions are at times. And this, given that China is this enormous power and it's going to be the biggest economy in the world, etc., pretty soon, it creates a certain degree of apprehension because one does not understand, one is always a little fearful what these capabilities might be used for at a later point of time once they become more entrenched.
Right. Victor, what is your view on that? Should China be making its intentions more clear? Should it be telegraphing its intentions to ease the kind of apprehensions that Sourabh's been talking about?
Well, definitely, I think China needs to do a much better job going forward in making its intentions and strategies better known and understood by other countries. On the other hand, it's also important to emphasize that the world we are living in today is also very, very different. You know, mankind is faced with threats from terrorism, from extremism, and many other non-traditional forces, unconventional forces, and I think mankind probably would need, a stronger China, a China which is ready to be fully engaged with many other parts of the world to play a more constructive role, including projecting its military presence. I would say in fighting against piracy, for example, as well as in fighting against terrorism, as well as keeping peace under the United Nations banner, for example. China can do a lot of things going forward, but China really need to make itself better known and also try to reduce any kind of miscomprehension or a misunderstanding on the parts of other major powers in the world. And further, I would say, the United States for many years has been accusing China of being a free rider and is pointing out to the dilemma that on the one hand, major countries in the world need China to be more readily engaged in dealing with these international crises, but on the other hand, they want China to make its position better known and more transparent to the other major powers in the world. Therefore, I think communication, dialogue, and making China's position better known to the other countries will be absolutely necessary going forward in the coming years. However, I would say that a world where China is ready to be fully engaged with will be a better world, because China will be ready to make its resources available to join other major powers in the world whenever crises happen, whenever confrontations happen in other parts of the world. And when there was a major evacuation effort needed in Yemen, for example, the Chinese naval ships actually evacuated not only Chinese nationals from Yemen, but also about nationals from about a dozen countries from Yemen. And I would say this will continue and be repeated going forward when the Chinese military will have a chance to serve the international community by making its resources and capabilities available.